The air in grandmother's aspen lodge was colder than the blizzard outside, but my brother didn't seem to notice. Hunter tapped his champagne glass, silencing the table. To the future, he beamed, projecting a slide deck onto the mahogany wall. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't just a pitch. It was my proprietary business model, my data, my contacts, my entire life's work stamped with his name. He looked me dead in the eye, smiling like a shark. And the best part? Savannah has agreed to fund the seed round and consult for free. Family first, right? My parents applauded. I hadn't agreed to a single thing. First off, Happy New Year 2026 to this amazing community. I hope this year brings you nothing but peace, joy, and the courage to be yourself. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from to kick off the year. I'd love to say hello. I didn't gasp. I didn't knock over my wine glass in shock. Most people would have caused a scene, flipped the table, or screamed about theft. But I wasn't most people. I was Savannah, the ghost in the machine of this family. I looked at the screen, my market analysis, my projections, my intellectual property, and I felt a strange, icy calm settle over me. It was a clarity so sharp it almost cut. He must have taken the files from my laptop when I left it open in the library to take a call earlier. Sloppy on my part, predatory on his. Sociologists have a term for children like me. They call us the glass child. When you have a sibling who takes up all the oxygen in the room, whether through talent, sickness, or in Hunter's case, sheer gravitational entitlement, you learn to become transparent. You learn that your needs are just smudges on the window that prevent your parents from getting a clear view of their golden boy. I had spent 28 years perfecting the art of invisibility. I learned to absorb shock without a ripple, to make myself small so the family structure wouldn't shatter. My parents thought my silence was compliance. They thought I was weak. But silence isn't weakness. It's a survival mechanism. It's data collection. And tonight, it was a weapon. I slipped my phone out of my clutch, keeping it below the heavy linen tablecloth. Face ID unlocked it instantly. I navigated to my cloud storage admin app. My heart rate didn't even spike. It was just business. There it was. An active session. Device name, Hunter's MacBook Pro. User status, guest. He hadn't even bothered to copy the files to his local drive. He was streaming them directly from my cloud, arrogant enough to think I wouldn't notice. Or maybe just stupid enough to think I wouldn't dare stop him. He thought I was still the glass he could look right through. He didn't realize glass can break, and when it does, it cuts deep. Hesitation implies uncertainty, and I had none. This wasn't an emotional decision. It was a security protocol. I selected the folder labeled Proprietary Assets. I tapped the 3 dots in the corner. Select option, Remote Wipe. The prompt asked me to confirm. I pressed my thumb down on the screen. It felt like pulling a trigger. On the wall, the projection stuttered. The slide showing my revenue model froze, pixelated, and then vanished. The room went dim as the projector threw up a stark black screen with white text. Access denied. Unauthorized user. Session terminated. The applause died instantly. Hunter froze, his clicker in midair. He tapped it frantically. Nothing. He looked at the laptop, mashing keys. Panic started to sweat through his dress shirt. My parents looked confused, their smiles faltering. Just a technical hiccup, Hunter stammered, his voice cracking. 1 second. I took a slow sip of my wine, the expensive vintage my grandmother had been saving for a special occasion. I set the glass down with a soft clink that sounded like a gavel. I looked at him. My expression perfectly pleasant, perfectly glass-like. Must be a glitch in your revolutionary tech, Hunter, I said softly. Or maybe you just lost your connection. To understand the mechanics of my retaliation, you have to look at the ledger. I've kept a mental balance sheet of this family for the last decade, and the math has never worked in my favor. Tonight wasn't an impulse, it was an audit. The disparity started with the numbers. I remember the exact figure. $26,500. That was the cost of the networking trip to Bali my parents funded for Hunter right after he failed his first startup attempt. He needed to clear his head, they said. He needed to find his vision. He came back with a tan, a beaded bracelet, and 0 business contacts. My parents called it a crucial investment in his global perspective. They celebrated his return with a dinner that cost more than my monthly car payment. Compare that to the winter of 2019. I was working double shifts, trying to scrape together the down payment for my first duplex. I was short on rent by $300 because my car's transmission had blown. I swallowed my pride and called home. It was the only time I ever asked for help. My father gave me a 20-minute lecture on the importance of grit and financial responsibility. 2 days later, a card arrived in the mail. Inside was a $60 Starbucks gift card and a note that said, "Character is built in the struggle." I kept that gift card in my wallet for 5 years. I never used it. I kept it as a reminder that in this family, Hunter's whims were investments, but my survival was an expense they weren't willing to cover. So I built my life in the dark. While Hunter was posting photos of his lifestyle paid for by the bank of mom and dad, I was learning the smell of industrial bleach at 2 in the morning. That was the reality of my empire in the beginning. It wasn't boardrooms and power suits. It was me, on my hands and knees, scrubbing grout in a foreclosure I'd bought with a hard money loan because no bank would touch me. It was sleeping in the backseat of my car between tenant turnovers because I couldn't afford the gas to drive back to my apartment. I remember showing up to Christmas dinner one year with my hands raw and red from chemical burns because I'd spent the previous 48 hours rehabbing a bathroom myself. Hunter sat across from me, smelling like the expensive woody cologne mom bought him, complaining that the heated seats in his new Audi, another gift, took too long to warm up. He looked at my hands and asked if I'd considered getting a manicure. He didn't see the equity I was building under my fingernails. He just saw a mess. They assumed I was just a property manager. To them, I was the help. I was the reliable, boring daughter who managed keys and fixed toilets for rich people. They never bothered to check the property records. They never asked whose name was on the deeds. They assumed the wealth I managed belonged to someone else because, in their worldview, I wasn't capable of generating it. I was the glass child, remember? I was there to be looked through, not looked at. But while they were looking through me, I was stacking deeds. 1 duplex turned into 4. 4 turned into a commercial mixed-use building. I leveraged equity, refinanced, and reinvested every single dime. I built a portfolio worth $5.2 million while they were busy celebrating Hunter's potential. They saw a quiet daughter. I saw a compounding asset. And tonight, when Hunter tried to steal the blueprints to the castle I built with my own blood and bleach, he finally realized that the invisible girl had been the architect all along. The next morning, the air inside the lodge was colder than the blizzard burying the driveway outside. I walked into the kitchen to find a tribunal waiting for me. Hunter was leaning against the granite island, his eyes bloodshot, clutching a mug of black coffee like it was a weapon. My parents, Richard and Susan, sat at the long wooden table, their postures rigid, their faces set in masks of disappointment. It wasn't the disappointment of parents whose son had been caught stealing. It was the disappointment of generals whose soldier had refused to march into cannon fire. "You think you're clever?" Hunter spat the moment I entered the room. "Unlock the files, Savannah. I have investors calling me. I need that data back. Now." I poured myself a glass of water, my movements deliberate and slow. "I didn't steal anything, Hunter. I just revoked access to property that wasn't yours." That's when my father slammed his hand on the table. The sound echoed off the high beams. "Enough games, Savannah. You humiliated your brother. You humiliated this family. Do you have any idea how much damage you caused last night?" I leaned against the counter, watching them. It was fascinating, really. I was witnessing a textbook case of what psychologists call the cognitive dissonance of the entitled. Watching Hunter's face twist with rage, I realized he wasn't lying to manipulate me. He actually believed he was the victim. See, when you've been handed everything your entire life, the word no doesn't sound like a boundary. It sounds like oppression. For Hunter to admit that he stole my work, he would have to admit that he is incapable of creating his own. He would have to face the terrifying reality of his own mediocrity. His brain couldn't handle that trauma, so it rewrote the script. In his mind, my intellectual property was a family resource, like the groceries in the fridge. My success was something he was entitled to harvest because, in his world, I exist solely to be consumed. "You lived under my roof for 18 years, my father continued, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous register he used to control boardrooms. "You learned your work ethic from this family. You built those contacts while we supported you. That intellectual property isn't just yours. It belongs to the legacy. And you owe a debt to this family for the opportunities we gave you." The gaslighting was almost impressive in its audacity. They were trying to bill me for my own childhood. They were claiming equity in a business they didn't even know existed 24 hours ago. "Your brother needs to salvage these investor relationships," my mother chimed in, her voice trembling with that weaponized fragility she perfected years ago. "You made him look incompetent. To fix this, We're going to need you to transfer the rights to the presentation back to him. And given the potential loss of funding, we think it's only fair that you cover the seed round yourself." I blinked, ensuring my face remained a blank slate. "You want me to give him the work he stole, and then pay him for the privilege?" "We want you to write a check for $50,000, my father said, as if ordering a steak, "to stabilize the venture. It's the least you can do after the stunt you pulled. Consider it an investment in your brother's future. And if you don't? Well, Savannah, we'll be reviewing the estate planning. If you aren't part of this team, you won't be part of this inheritance." There it was, the ultimate threat, the financial guillotine they had used to keep everyone in line for decades. They thought they were holding a sword over my head. They didn't realize I had already built my own kingdom, and I didn't need a single brick from theirs. I agreed to the family meeting in the library. My parents sat in the high-backed leather armchairs, looking like monarchs who had just successfully quelled a peasant rebellion. Hunter was pacing near the fireplace, looking smug. They expected me to walk in with a checkbook. They expected an apology, a transfer of funds, and a return to the status quo, where I was the silent engine keeping their lifestyle afloat. I walked in with my laptop and a thick manila envelope. I didn't sit down. I walked straight to the large flat-screen television mounted above the mantel, the one my father usually used to watch golf. I plugged in my HDMI cable. The screen flickered to life. "What are you doing, Savannah?" my mother asked, her tone shifting from expectant to annoyed. "We're waiting for the check." "I'm glad you brought up the concept of investment," I said, my voice steady and cool. "Because if I'm going to be a shareholder in this family's future, I think it's time we conducted a proper audit. Since we're talking about assets and legacy, let's look at the real numbers." I hit the spacebar. The first slide appeared. It was a simple bar graph, stark and undeniable. On the left was a towering green column labeled Savannah's net worth. The number at the top read $5.2 million. On the right was a bar that dipped deep into the negative, colored a violent red. It was labeled Hunter's solvency. The room went so quiet, I could hear the wind howling against the window panes. My father squinted at the screen, his mouth slightly open. Hunter stopped pacing. "This is a breakdown of my current real estate portfolio," I explained, using the same professional cadence I used with bank underwriters. 32 doors, 3 commercial properties, 0 delinquencies. And that red bar? That's the cumulative debt of Hunter's last 3 failed ventures, plus the personal loans you've taken out to bail him out. I'm not just managing properties, Dad. I own the block. You have $5 million? My mother whispered. The number seemed to physically stagger her. She looked at me, and for the first time in 28 years, she didn't see a glass child. She saw a bank vault she hadn't managed to crack. I clicked to the next slide. It was a scanned legal document. A trademark registration. "Hunter, you mentioned your revolutionary tech startup," I said, turning to my brother. "The brand name you were pitching last night? The one you plastered all over my stolen slides? I filed the trademark for that 6 months ago. It's my intellectual property. Legally, you are pitching a product you don't own, under a name you don't have the rights to use." Hunter's face turned the color of ash. You trademarked it?" "I did. Because unlike you, I do my due diligence." I closed the laptop and picked up the manila envelope. I slid it across the mahogany table toward my father. Inside, he found a document, on heavy, watermarked paper. "That is a cease and desist letter, drafted by my attorney this morning. It states that if Hunter attempts to use my data, my business model, or my trademarked brand name again, I will file an immediate injunction and sue for damages. This isn't a sisterly spat, Richard. This is corporate litigation. If you want to cut me out of the will, go ahead. But if you try to steal my work again, I will bury you in legal fees until there is no legacy left to inherit." The library was deadly silent. Hunter had collapsed into a wingback chair, looking like a deflated balloon. My mother was clutching her pearls as if they were the only thing keeping her upright. But my father, Richard, was vibrating with rage. His face had gone a mottled purple. "You ungrateful, selfish girl!" my mother finally shrieked, her voice bouncing off the bookshelves. "We sacrificed everything for you. We gave you a home, an education, a safety net. And this is how you repay us? By destroying your brother's future over a trademark? By humiliating your father?" I opened my mouth to respond, to point out the absurdity of calling neglect a sacrifice. But a voice from the corner cut me off. "Sacrificed?" Uncle Scott laughed, a dark, jagged sound that scraped against the tension in the room. "Is that what we're calling it now? Richard? I turned. My Uncle Scott had been sitting in the shadows by the window, nursing a tumbler of scotch. He was the black sheep of his generation, the one who refused to join the family business, the one who saw through the facade. He stood up slowly, the ice clinking in his glass. "Scott, stay out of this," my father warned, his voice tight. "No, I don't think I will." Scott walked toward the center of the room. He looked at me, his eyes sad and sharp. "Savannah, do you remember when you were 22? When you wanted to start your first LLC and you needed $5,000 for closing costs? You asked your parents for a loan. They told you they were tapped out. They told you they had just paid for Hunter's legal fees after that incident. In Cabo." I nodded. I remembered it perfectly. I had worked 3 jobs that summer to make up the difference. "They lied," Scott said simply. He took a sip of his drink. "They weren't tapped out. And Hunter didn't have legal fees. Or rather, he did, but that's not where the money came from." "What are you talking about?" I asked, my blood running cold. "Your grandmother left trust funds for both of you," Scott said, turning to glare at his brother. "Equal amounts, $80,000 each, intended for education or starting a business. It was supposed to unlock when you turned 25. "I never got a trust fund," I said. "Mom told me Grandma didn't leave anything because the estate was eaten up by taxes." "That's what they told you," Scott said. "But 3 years ago, when Hunter got into that mess, the DUI that Richard spent a fortune covering up so it wouldn't ruin his image, they needed cash fast. They didn't use their own money. They forged your signature. Savannah. They drained your entire trust fund to pay off the settlement and keep Hunter out of jail." The room seemed to tilt. I looked at my parents. They weren't denying it. My mother was looking at the floor. My father was staring at Scott with pure hatred. "They didn't sacrifice for you, Savannah," Scott finished, his voice heavy with disgust. "They robbed you. They stole your seed money to pay for your brother's crimes. And then they had the audacity to call you selfish for building an empire from zero while they were spending your inheritance on bail money." I looked at Hunter. He didn't look shocked. He looked relieved. He knew. He had known the whole time. The seed money he claimed to have for his startup wasn't from an angel investor. It was my money. It had always been my money. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was criminal. And in that moment, the last thread of obligation I felt toward these people snapped. It didn't just break. It incinerated. The dynamic in the room inverted so fast I felt the air pressure change. My parents went from accusers to defendants in the span of a sentence. Richard's face was gray. Susan was weeping silently. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of exposure. Richard tried to stammer a justification, his voice weak and trembling. "It was a loan, Savannah. We were going to pay it back. Once Hunter's company took off, once he made it big, we were going to put every cent back into the account with interest. You were never supposed to know." I looked at Hunter. He was staring at his parents, realizing for the first time that he was the reason they were criminals. He realized his entire life, his safety net, his second chances, his seed money was built on a crime committed against his sister. But entitlement is a powerful drug. Instead of shame, I saw calculation in his eyes. "So, the money is gone?" he asked, his voice flat. "That 80,000, it's just gone?" That was it. That was his takeaway. Not that his parents had committed fraud, not that his sister had been robbed, just that his safety net had a hole in it. I stood up. I looked at the people I had spent 28 years trying to impress, the people whose approval I had craved like oxygen, and suddenly I felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, just the cold, clean indifference of a stranger. I reached into my bag and pulled out one final document. It was a forensic accounting audit I had Uncle Scott run secretly last week when I first suspected something was off with the family finances. It detailed the withdrawal, the forged signature, the wire transfer to the law firm representing Hunter. I walked over to my mother and placed it gently in her lap. "I don't want the money back," I said, my voice quiet but filling the room. "Keep it. Consider it the final payment on a debt I never owed. It's the price of my freedom." My mother looked up at me, her eyes wide with fear. "Savannah, please, but if you ever contact me again," I continued, looking from her to my father to Hunter. "If you ever try to steal my work, slander my name, or ask for so much as a dime, this audit goes to the district attorney. And unlike the family secrets you've kept for years, fraud doesn't stay buried." Waiting for a response would imply their input still held value, so I didn't. I turned and walked out of the library, the heavy oak doors closing behind me with a final, satisfying click. I left them in the ruins of their own lies, a kingdom of ash and stolen gold. I packed my bag in silence, the only sound, the crunch of fresh snow under my boots as I walked out to the car. Not a rental, but my own SUV, paid for with the dividends of a portfolio I'd built brick by brick. The air outside was crisp, biting, and incredibly clean. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. As I started the engine and began the drive down the mountain, leaving the lodge and its toxic history in the rearview mirror, I thought about the nature of revenge. We often think of revenge as a loud event, a public takedown, a scream, a battle won in the Colosseum. But true revenge, the kind that lasts, the kind that actually heals, is architectural. It's built in silence. For years, my family mistook my quiet for weakness. They thought my lack of protest was submission. They didn't realize that while they were making noise, I was laying foundations. While they were performing success, I was constructing it. Silence isn't empty. It's the sound of building something that no one can take away from you. I pulled my phone from the center console. I opened the family group chat, the one where Hunter had preened and my parents had applauded for years. Silence was the only message required. I tapped delete and exit group. A notification popped up almost immediately. Hunter has requested $50. I laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. Even now, even after everything, the entitlement was a reflex he couldn't control. I blocked the number. Then I blocked my parents. One by one, I severed the digital tethers that had bound me to their expectations. As I reached the highway, I drove past a commercial building with a for-lease sign in the window. I smiled. I closed on that property last week. It was mine. The road ahead was open, clear, and entirely my own design. I wasn't the glass child anymore. I was the architect of my own life, and the view from here was magnificent. If you're building your own life in silence while the world makes noise, share this story. Happy New Year, 2026 to all of you. May this be the year you finally build the life you deserve. Start building.